And so it's on to tonight's program, Mono Lake Osprey, the Morro Coast and beyond. This is a very timely program because as of last year, we have 2 Osprey nest platforms that have been installed at Sweet Springs, thanks to the generosity of our donors. Our speaker tonight is Lisa Fields. She's Senior Environmental Scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Lisa worked for California State Parks for over 20 years, including 11 years in the Sierra Nevada, before moving to California Department of Fish and Wildlife in the North Central region in Sacramento County. She initiated the Osprey Nest Monitoring Program at Mono Lake in 2004 as part of her work, and has continued to be involved as a volunteer. Lisa's passion is raptor management, particularly the osprey at Mono Lake. So it is my great pleasure to turn you over to Lisa Fields.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. Let me get the screen share set up so that you can see the presentation. And there we go. So would, of course, be remiss if I didn't thank my fellow researchers, Ashley Lewis with California State Parks and Pete Bloom with Bloom Research, Bloom Biological, and to, oops, is this going to advance? There we go. So tonight, I'm really passionate about these osprey, and I like to tell a story to get us all on the same page, because to really understand where my passion comes from and to hopefully instill that in you, I think storytelling is important. And you really have to first understand osprey themselves and understand Mono Lake to understand why the osprey at Mono Lake is so fascinating. And then the data that we've been collecting throughout this project and what that means for osprey in general. So I'll start with osprey and then Mono Lake, then go into the Mono Lake osprey research to bring it all together. So what is an osprey? Well, first and foremost, an osprey is a raptor or a bird of prey. They occur on every continent except Antarctica, so nearly worldwide, and they're adapted to many different environments. They're very well known, very conspicuous species with these large stick nests, big birds, a little bit noisy for a raptor, and a lot of people live near osprey, and they're both migratory and non-migratory populations. Just real quick on migration in general, this will come into play later, is that there are basically 4 general migration corridors that have been defined by scientists as occurring within North America. So to highlight them, we have the Pacific Flyway here that we're all a part of along the coast and going about to the Rockies. Then you move over to the Central Flyway, the Mississippi Flyway, and then finally the Atlantic Flyway. And we found that previous research has found that northern populations are long distance migrants. So birds that have osprey that have nested within the Pacific Northwest of the United States have been documented as migrating down to Chile. And then we have some resident populations, meaning non-migratory, spend the full year in Baja California and in Florida, kind of in that band. And osprey are a long-lived species and they have an interesting adaptation to not being reproductively active until they're at least 3 years old, that they don't return north that first year. Migration is expensive. So the birds that hatched back in 2019, in the fall, they flew south, then they stayed south. So good example for all of us now, we can understand 2020, they just sort of skipped it. And then they came back now in 2021. And in the Sierra Nevada, where this population that I'm talking about resides and reproduces, they arrive by early April and then depart by late September. Osprey are a rather large bird. They are about 23 inches in length, wingspan of about 63 inches. And an in-person talk can show you my wingspan. Doesn't work quite as well for scale on Zoom, but My wingspan is about 58 inches. The 63-inch wingspan is about 5'3". So if you know anybody who's 5'3", turn them sideways and you've got the Osprey wingspan. And then they weigh about 3.5 pounds. To identify an Osprey, first, you're looking for that crooked wing in flight that you can see that. So when people are first starting out, they're not familiar with Osprey, they're most likely to misidentify them as a gull because it has that similar crooked wing. For those that get into that gestalt of birding, say it has a chunkier wing than a gull, takes practice getting to that point. So what you're looking for is that looking for this dark carpal patch, that's that dark spot here at the bend of the wing, and then this white belly. And then the other thing that bird that Osprey commonly get misidentified as is the bald eagle, because you key in quickly on this white head, but with this dark eye stripe, that's going to be the Osprey. And then note how the tail has that little bit of banding in it. Then adults and juveniles look almost identical. They just have a red eye you're going to see on the juvenile versus the adult has a yellow eye. That's really when they're perched and you have a really good view. More than that, what you're looking for is a little bit of scalloping, which you can't see as well in this picture, but I will point it out in some later photos to show. But it's the ends of all the feathers have a white edge to them that kind of looks like scalloping on the back. And then as for sound, we have sound piped in here, so you can give a listen to this short high-pitched whistle. So not real intimidating or noticeable, but when you start paying attention, you hear it a lot. They're pretty vocal for a raptor. And finally, they don't show much difference in size between male and female. The female is slightly larger, but you really have to have them side by side to be able to see that difference. So it's really difficult to determine male or female without behavioral cues. Their nests, really one of the things that a lot of people are familiar with, really makes them noticeable, is these large stick nests. They want full visibility, full 360. So, they're looking for the tops of these trees. Mono Lake, those tufa really provide that. That's why you also see them on the top of utility towers, things of that nature. They'll have some been found on buoys, on chimneys, really anything that gives that full view. And they're going to add to it throughout the season as part of their mating displays. And so that's how it just becomes so large. And they have that high nest site fidelity, meaning that the same pair is going to return to the nest year after year. And when they return, they're going to be adding to the nest over time, because when they migrate, the males and females are migrating to different places. So the pairs only together when they're actually on the nesting grounds. And these nests can be huge. So hopefully you've seen some or will see some soon to get that in-person feeling. Only so much we can do over Zoom, but we're doing our best. So prey items. Osprey are a fish-eating bird. 99% of the diet, many birds, 100% of their diet is going to be fish. And it's just literally fish, not a specific fish. It's about the behavior of the fish. So they're going to exploit fresh and salt water. It's about really their ability to catch the fish. So fish that are occurring in the top about 3 feet, 1 meter of the water column. And they're capturing half 1 pound fish. You may recall I said adult Osprey about 3.5 pounds. So they're flying with a 1 pound fish. Could be 30% of their weight. So how does an aerial bird capture something out of the water? And while they can swim, they don't actually swim. So the main methods of fishing, really they're grabbing that fish on the wing. So they're either going to fly in low and kind of skim across and drag their feet to grab the fish from behind. But the one that is much more common to be seen and captured is this plunge that they make where they'll hover over the water, maybe 100 feet above the water, circling slowly, looking for a prey item. When they zoom in on a fish, they see a fish, they decide they're going for it. they will go into the steep dive, going head first, just straight down. They can be going 80 miles an hour. And then as they get close to the water, you can see in this picture how they begin to kick their feet out. So they're described as going in feet first, but really they fold themselves in half. And so they use their feet to break the water. At that point, they slow down to 20 to 40 miles an hour and crash through the water with their feet, but they never take their eye off the fish. They're always looking straight down. And as a result, they're successful in greater than 50% of the attempts when they commit to the dive. And they will completely submerge in order to catch that fish. And, I don't think they have a choice when they're hitting the water at 30 miles an hour. They're going to completely submerge, and they'll go under, usually maybe up to about 1 meter. At that point, if they've connected and that fish is in their talons, or then they have it. If they don't have it in their talons, they don't have it. They don't go after it. Like a diving duck, say, will start moving underwater to find it. The osprey has that one slam into the fish, and that's why they prefer surface fish in clear water. And then they'll kind of back out with their wings to push out of the water. And then that's where you see they kind of do that shake to get all of the water off them and kind of get situated and fly away. So they have a number of adaptations in order to be able to do that. The first is just the eyesight, being able to not just to have the eyesight to see that fish in the water below, but also in order to compensate for light refraction. So when you're looking in water, you've got the experiment as a kid with the glass with the straw in it. It looks like it has that bend from the light refraction. The osprey are able to adjust for that. So when they're going into the water to grab it, they're really going to where the fish is, not where we would perceive the fish to be. Next, hitting water at that speed, that force. Think about when you jump into a pool, that force of water that comes up. They have a split nostril, so they can, they can't go like this and close their nose. So they have that split nostril that they're able to close it completely to prevent the water from slamming up into there. And then when they do have their talons in the fish, they have what's called reverse outer toes. Familiar with other birds, similar to woodpeckers, that, see if you can see in here, that normally a bird is going to have 3 claws in front and then the 1 toe behind, and which is a really hard way to hold on to a slippery fish with 3 in 1. So they can actually swing the outer toes back and have 2 on either side in order to get a stronger grip. And then they have what's called spicules on the feet. That is close up of the feet here. Depending on your screen, you might be able to see it's just a roughened surface. So it basically provides them a kind of like sandpaper, again, to help hold on to a slippery fish. That, of course, the fish is prey. It's fighting for its life at the same time. And then finally is that the osprey, once it takes flight and is out of the water, you'll see them purposefully turn the fish so that it's head forward. And sometimes when they catch the fish, they have it just by a talon, a couple talons. So you'll see them purposefully adjust it to get that good grip on it, get it head forward, and then they'll really fly to where they're going to either return to the nest or to their perch to consume the fish. That's my summary of osprey. Take a quick sip here. And move on to the second piece of the puzzle, which is Mono Lake. Why study osprey at Mono Lake? Well, to get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about Mono Lake natural history. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page here again, Mono Lake is here in the Eastern Sierra where the California State Park symbol is. And for reference, the black star is kind of the Morro Bay area for those of you that are actually in that location tonight. I know it's virtual, we can be anywhere. It's about 200 miles straight line from Mono Lake to Morro Bay. Then just a little close up of Mono Lake and the surrounding land in the area. It's a lot of protected public lands. So this is dark green is the northeast part of Yosemite National Park. And then you have this band of Inyo National Forest and BLM land with Mono Lake in the middle.
For iPad? It's for my phone.
So Mono Lake is a terminal lake. That's just one of the many things that makes it special. And the story of Mono Lake is incredibly complex and more than I can cover during this presentation. So I'm just going to mention a few of the highlights, but if you're intrigued and want to learn more, there's a lot of great references I can plug. Hopefully next year we'll have an in-person Mono Basin Bird Chautauqua in June. I lead a field trip on this presentation, but also you can get some great field walks with staff in the Mono Lake Committee to learn more about Mono Lake itself. Mono Lake is a naturally fishless lake. It's hyper-saline, and as a result of it being hyper-saline, about 3 times as salty as the ocean. It also has a pH almost close to 10, so very alkaline. The lake level has varied over hundreds of thousands of years. That Mono Lake is on the western edge of the Great Basin. So meaning that there is no natural outflow, no stream flow out of it. It only loses water through evaporation. It gets water inputs through snowmelt and through all of the input streams. And back in 1941, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power started diverting much of the freshwater input to Mono Lake for drinking water for the city of Los Angeles. At that time, the lake level was at 6417 feet. It dropped a full 45 vertical feet, which caused the lake to lose half of its volume, and it doubled in salinity at that time. There was a lot of legal action over the decades, and finally in 1994, a court decision was made that the lake is mandated to rise to 6392 feet. It has not made it to that point, so it's currently at 6380 feet, but it's a very dynamic system. But as a result of all of this, while there were Tupa Towers exposed before, many more have become available, many more have become exposed. We'll get into that more in a second. Before we go into that, I just wanted to show a simplified map of the freshwater inputs to understand the geography a little bit more. So you can see that they're all on the west side of Mono Lake. So it's all the main inflow of waters coming out of the Sierra Nevada. And we'll be talking more about Levine Creek a few times as I go through this presentation. So what is a Tupa Tower? You've possibly heard of them. You've likely seen pictures of them if you haven't been there. They are incredibly photogenic and really cool to look at. But they're formed by from the precipitate there's freshwater springs that bubble up through Mono Lake, and where that fresh water meets the salt water, they have formed this precipitate that drops out that forms these Tupa Towers. So while they're above the water, that actually gives you an indication how high the water was at one time, because they only are formed when they're submerged. So all Tupa Towers that are exposed are no longer, that part of the tower is no longer growing. So they have a lot of protections around them because any damage that's done is permanent. So they've been exposed with the lake level drop, but they provide excellent osprey nesting habitat. And great for photography. Some of them, you start seeing shapes in them. Some of them have names. This one we refer to as pirate ship. It kind of looks like a pirate ship. And so just to give you a little bit of a visual tour of Mono Lake, in case you haven't been there, this is the South Tupa area, which is one of the main areas where you can go and explore the Tupa and one of the best places to see nesting osprey. And this is looking back west at the Sierra Nevada. So that if you're familiar with the area, that's Mount Dana in the background with the snow on it. And so that's Yosemite, and then the Inyo National Forest, and then the Mono Basin. And it's actually the photo behind me. Then I mentioned Levine Creek. It goes through the town of Levine here, and you can, so this is taken near the town, and South Tupa is about 5 miles east of here where that last photo is taken, which is kind of in this little spot where the water, where you can see the water in the image. And then this is further up Levine Canyon. and this is along Highway 120. And so you can see it very different look to it of you have that more wet meadow with the higher forested hillsides over here. And then finally going much further south to June Lake to get another perspective and view of the general habitat is I'm on a trail on a ridge up above June Lake looking north. So you might be able to see in the background here, that's this blue is Mono Lake. And also I like this picture because it helps you understand just, I have a really hard time with depth perception out there. I think a lot of people do. Distances just are deceiving. So in this photo, Mono Lake is actually, the water is about 13 miles away. This black spot is Nedget Island, which is about 16 miles away. So now that we've had our tour of Osprey and Mono Lake, I think it's good to take a quick review of what we've learned so far and how these things compare. So we said Osprey is essentially a worldwide species, and Mono Lake is part of the world. Again, we're on the east side of the Sierra Nevada. Osprey build large stick nests with an unobstructed view, and Mono Lake absolutely provides that between the Tupa Towers that have a spot for the large stick nests, and then the Great Basin vegetation, which really provides that open view shed. Osprey are associated with fresh and salt water. Salt water, it's hyper-saline, kind of there, but we obviously have those freshwater inlets, so in the area. And then Osprey are a fish-eating bird, but Mono Lake is a fishless lake. So all of that caused us to have a whole lot of questions as to what's going on here and to initiate the Mono Lake Osprey study. And it's driven by both basic research desires and I'm trying to understand what's going on, as well as management driven. So I started this when I worked for California State Parks, and Mono Lake Tufa State Natural Reserve is part of the California State Park system. So looking at how, if it informs management, and depending on migration, if they're migrating to other California State Park units, might have that connection. So looking at population status and trends, as well as the local and long distance movements. And then finally, to inform interpretation, people would always ask, where did the osprey go? Where did the osprey fish? And, you know, a couple of times I would give the answer for migration of just this nebulous place called South. But it's not really polite to constantly have sarcastic answers. And so really wanting to be able to answer those questions and really provide people that information. So the history of osprey at Mono Lake, give a little background, is in 1985 is when the first nesting pair was observed. From all the data I've searched through, there really wasn't osprey nesting on the east side of the Sierra prior to then. There was a here and there would be a nest at, like in Lake Tahoe, and further north there was a population established at Eagle Lake, but nothing in Mono Lake. And so it caught a lot of attention to people that were there in 1985. I really owe a lot to the rangers, particularly Dave Carl, who was there at the time, that made a lot of observations in his ranger notes, including following this first nest. And so we know that it was first successful in 1989, which is not unusual for osprey to fail the first couple of years. Then we have a little bit of a break that after that there wasn't really consistent data collection on what was going on. I came to the program in 2004 and initiated a scientific-based quantitative monitoring program. Then in 2009, we started banding of nestlings. And in 2013, we put out our first telemetry unit on an adult female. Just prior to that is when I left the area, but I stayed involved, and I had Ashley Lewis and Pete Bloom that did an amazing job of keeping it going. And so I volunteered to help what I can do talks like this. And then in 2015, we put out 2 more telemetry units on an adult male and an adult female, and a juvenile. And said, so far things have been pretty linear, sounds really simple. This is where, once we start getting into the data, it gets a little bit more, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but That's because it's fun and I want to share all the fun little pieces. So, and this is what you get. I mean, it's awesome to have more than 15 years worth of data to really start seeing these trends. So the first thing we look at is fishable waters. That osprey are a fish-eating bird. They are usually described in an ID guide as nesting within 1 mile of fishable waters. We just don't have that here. So combining, what we know about osprey and what we know about Mono Lake, just did a simple map of where we are within fishable waters. So my apologies to those of you that aren't familiar with the metric system. Unfortunately, this map is in kilometers, but that the 1 mile of fishable waters equates to 1.6 kilometers. So this is centered on Navy Beach, which is where that first nest was found. So that's where the population established itself. And there are no fishable waters within 1.6 kilometers. This is Levine Creek here, which is the first fishable waters within range of this nest. And so that's going a few miles. And then osprey have been recorded traveling up to 20 kilometers or 12.5 miles to forage in other studies. So that's where this outer ring is, because the other thing I would get from people is that they would just ask, when I was starting out with the study, is kind of remember that scale question of things look a lot closer and feel a lot closer than they are sometimes out here. So people thought, well, it's obvious. The osprey are just going to June Lake. June Lake is here on this 20-kilometer boundary. This is Grant Lake here, between 10 and 15. So these are pretty big distances. Again, if you're carrying a fish back to your nest, that's about 30% of your weight that you're then having to fly with. But the total number of osprey has just been increasing over time. So despite all of that, there's something about Mono Lake that is really attractive to breeding osprey. So we started that first nest in 1985. In 2004, when we started the quantitative monitoring, we were up to 6 pairs, and it's steadily increasing, but there's this interesting cyclical pattern that we're starting to see emerge. And interestingly, 2020 and 2021 had almost identical data that we see between not just the total number of nests, but the dark band at the bottom are the number of successful nests, so meaning that at least one nestling made it to fledging. And then the light blue is that it failed, so meaning that they laid eggs, but no nestlings fledged. And so with this pattern, I'm really curious what happens in the next few years, if we're going to see another jump come up, which is suggested by what we're seeing here, or if we've hit some sort of a plateau. It doesn't look like we've hit any sort of a capacity, but we're still learning. So stay tuned to see what happens. And one thing is that with the open nature of Mono Lake, not only is it really attractive to osprey that want that visibility, but for researchers, it's awesome that it's one of the rare sites where you can really feel confident that when we do a lake-wide census, that we are really capturing all of the osprey pairs that are present. Those big conspicuous nests, we're really able to see them and feel confident that we've found all of the nests. Unlike when you're looking in the forested environment, sometimes you're missing nests because they're a little bit more, although the osprey has a great view, we may not have a view of as easy of the nest. So reproductive success of osprey in general, they're known to have a range of 1 to 4 young per pair. We regularly have 2 to 3 young that are hatching and fledging at Mono Lake. In 2008 was the first time we saw 4 young. That you can see this very full nest right here. We have an adult here, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 juveniles, nestlings on there, getting close to ready to fledge. Part of the reason why they have those big stick nests. For comparison, the studies we've done at Lake Tahoe, they average more like 1 to 2 young per nest. So really high nesting reproductive success here at Mono Lake. And the first year, the nestlings have about a 45 to 60% chance of survival. If they survive that first year, then they have an 85% chance of survival each additional year. So this is looking at the number of young fledged per breeding pair. This is how we kind of normalize and compare the data across years. And so fair amount of variability that's going on. What's really important is learning from other studies that to have a stable population, you're looking at from 0.95 to 1.3 young fledged per active nest. So that's what's represented by this red bar. And then see a little bit more of the story of just how many years that we're having above this red bar, which indicates all of these years is that we're having an increase in population. And then we're stable for these 3 years that are inside. And then this 1 year here, 2011, would be the only year where we didn't have that replacement. And a lot of things can contribute to the nesting success. Weather is a big one that we can't control. Big late season snowstorm, rain, wind event knocking nests, things like that. Predation is one of the things that actually attracts the osprey to Mono Lake. That's something that we need to continue to test, but they really are only nesting on the tufa that are completely surrounded by water, which has eliminated any ground predators that may come in. So they're only looking at aerial predators, and there aren't that many aerial predators. We really haven't been recording predation as occurring, which is contributing to the high success rates here. Food availability is another one. The streams are all stocked with trout, so kind of ironic that I moved over to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which stocks the streams. And then human disturbance can be another factor that affects breeding success. So we have a number of measures in place to try and keep people away, education programs, and actually have some superintendent's orders that have fines associated with them if you enter the buffers that are set up to protect the osprey during nesting season. And if you're wondering about, I said that they average 2 to 3 young per pair at Mono Lake, and these numbers, the highest is just a little over 2. This calculation includes the failed nests. So for example, 2009 here, there were only 4 reproductively active pairs, of which 2 successfully fledged young. So 50% of the nests fledged young, but those 50% fledged 5 young. 1 had 2 young and 1 had 3 young. So the way the math works out, it still comes out as a highly successful. So the banding program, we initiated that in 2009, really wanting to start learning about some of the individual birds and some of the dispersal, what's going on, and shopped around for a while. And finally in 2015, we're able to get color bands, which is really what's helped us and helped with increased data. And I'm hoping we'll only continue to increase that. So in early to mid-July, we have 1 to 2 visits to band the nestlings, and then using USGS bands and really counting on citizen science and people observing and then reporting the bands to the bird banding lab. So our goal is always to band all the nestlings, but conditions are not always cooperative. In the early parts of the study, just a few nests, we usually could get everybody in 1 banding trip, but then as we've had more nests, they're not quite in sync as much. So sometimes the nestlings are just going to be too young. Sometimes now with the lake level dropping, sometimes we just can't access the nest. There's a number of different factors that play into it, but we always try and get to every nest. For osprey, a good return rate on these bands is about 5% over time. And right now we're at 6%, which is awesome. And I hope to get that number going up. Because some of that is attributed to the color banding program. About half of our returns at this point are from photos of the color bands, which is really the purpose of why we put on the color bands and why I give talks like this, to try and bring awareness and get more people looking and interested in getting them reported. So when I say color bands, that can be a little bit of a misnomer for this population, that because we do have a white on black band, but which doesn't quite stand out on the osprey because of the dark coloration of the osprey, but it really helps for visibility in reading the bands. And so when you're banding, you know, you guaranteed one data point, which is where you put the band on. So that one's not a very helpful data point. Then you hope to get the second data point of a deceased bird that's recovered, and that comes in. And that's why the recovery rate is so low. But with these color bands, the goal is to get people to be able to see them, live birds, and report them, so we can get more data points, multiple points per bird within the course of their lifetime. And that's how we have these stories. And I mentioned earlier I was going to get back to the scalloping and the eye color. This is a juvenile here, and see that you can see that red eye, versus on the left we have an adult with that yellow eye. And said you really only see that when it's close, but I know a couple people that have nest photos and they think that they got like red eye, and try and change the color in the computer of the eye, but that's really what the eye is supposed to look like on the juveniles. And then you can see how the edge of the wing here, I think there's some better photos later to be able to see that scalloping on the coloration. So just some close-ups here on the numbers to be able to read them. So into that band recovery data, we've had over a dozen band recoveries to date, including 3 that came in over this summer. And said more than half of our reports are now photos from live birds. But we, every time they get a little bit of a lull, we get another great surprise, which is fun. When we initiated this in 2015, or our first, or 2009 for the first banding, our first band recovery was actually from Ingleside, Texas, which was a huge surprise to us. So right off the bat, our first data point had some head scratching. It's where, if you can recall that migration pathway chart that I showed in the beginning, you've got the Pacific Flyway here that goes on up to about the Rockies. And here we're getting into that we're in that next flyway. Birds we thought went north-south, and we're finding in this one obviously had an east-west movement, which was unexpected. And then our next band return, is back at Mono Lake, which, like, okay, we knew that they're there, but that confirmed for the first time that we had a bird that fledged that then came back, because we're also looking at dispersal. So being a scientist, although you're like, well, yeah, of course, if the population's expanding, they're fledging and coming back. But this was the first true data point we had to really confirm that, yes, the expansion that we were seeing, at least, was partially from birds that had hatched there that had returned to reproduce. Then the next data point is actually where this talk comes in a little bit more, is it's from the Morro Coast, from Oceano Dunes State Vehicular Recreation Area. And then not long after that, we had another data point from Tillamook, Oregon. So a little bit of a northward movement. So things are really getting strange and very fascinating, at least for me, because I love this data. And then finally, the one that is really the head scratcher is all the way from Alabama, very far to the east, and getting into that Atlantic flyway. So I will touch slightly on that later, because that one is, I think, one of the most fascinating stories. And it's about 1,900 miles away. So again, the Morro Coast Audubon connection is thanks to our great plover monitoring crew. They were out and saw this osprey and saw that there was a band, said that it sure sounds simple about, yeah, just get photos, but it actually can take a lot of patience and persistence to capture the band in a way that you can read it. So really appreciate it when people see the band and take the time to make sure to capture the data for us, because we're really counting on that. And so you can see the osprey clearly moved, because there's a different post here than here. And so there's a hint of the band sticking out right here. And it really takes looking at these a lot for that just to jump out. And, I see it, but I understand that it's not as obvious. And here you can see there's that silver band that's on the other leg, but those are nearly impossible to read if you're not holding it. But over time, finally, the osprey was very helpful and stuck its leg out with that number showing very clearly. And so we were able to get that report in, which was great. And that was the first report we had for the Central Coast, and that was out at Oso Flaco Lake. And actually, when that one came in, there was some real confusion with the recovery, and I still sometimes get confused and have to look at the data again, because we got this one in on September 1st of 2018, but on that same sheet on September 6th of 2018, there was an osprey that was photographed, and I didn't get those pictures, and so that adds to it. But so this one you saw is Black 73, which made this movement from Mono Lake to Oso Flaco Lake. Well, at the same time, essentially, we had Black 63, who was banded in Orange County. So Pete Bloom, who's the bander on this project, he works out of Orange County and needed to band some osprey down there and use the color bands, which made a lot of sense, and learned something, yet again, learned something new from that small number. So I always look at this and feel like this is a shorter distance, but in actuality, when I measure it, it's about 200 miles from Orange Coast up to Oso Flaco. And again, it's about 200 miles going across this way. So every time I'm in the area, I'm looking at all the osprey's legs. Looking, so far, I haven't had the luck of finding an abandoned one on my own, but I hope that one of you will and get that reported, whether you have the photo or just the view. But really great data and interesting movements. So we have the most data points from the Eastern Sierra that I'll just go through really quickly. As you can see on the legend on here, that gray dots markers mean that they were found dead, and the kind of purple blue ones are that we got a photograph. So had our first one from Grant Lake, which was found deceased. Then we had another one found deceased down at Mammoth Lakes. And then while we were banding, we were able to photograph a bird on the north part of Mono Lake. And then South Tupa, this is Black 18. We get a lot of reports from Black 18. Highest likelihood of seeing this one, which is so right at South Tupa, very obvious. And I've been able to, I have one of those recoveries. But that's what we want, is to get these multiple data points, as I said. So if you see that, you see a bird that you're like, oh, they know about this one, please still report it, because that's one more day we know that it was alive and where it was located. So even if we get reports from consecutive days, that's wonderful. And then going up to north of Mono Lake to Twin Lakes. And then we have a couple that came in as just general Mono Lake. So just another reminder, if you are reporting bands, to try and give as detailed of a written description as possible of where you found the bird or took the photo, so that we can get that more detailed information, and to give good contact information in case somebody wants to follow up. Oh, and then we have up at the Bridgeport Reservoir. So then that finishes up kind of some of the things I wanted to touch on the banding data, because there's always more, and I don't want to keep you here all night, because I did want to touch a little bit too on the telemetry program. This is where we really get that movement data. We so gave them names. That this is our first one, Monica, our female, that you can kind of see, I think, transmitter on her back here, but Leroy, our male, much greater view of the transmitter. This is it here with a little solar panel on the back to keep the battery going. And then this is Nigel, who is showing off that beautiful scalloping on the wing. You can see how the ends of the feathers have that kind of cream color to them. And on him, you can see how the antenna comes off the back. Unfortunately, something happened. We don't know if the transmitter malfunctioned or if he never survived fledging. We never found the transmitter, but we also never got any data. So I'm not sure what happened there. But we'll talk a little bit about Monica and Leroy. So Monica is our adult female, the first one that and so from her, we have a little bit of migration data, which when we got it, it seemed a little bit, okay, that it's great, no longer had to refer to that nebulous place called south. But interestingly, she's the only one that actually went south. So, I said with the banding data, we're getting movements all over the place. So here we thought this was great, confirming kind of just the generic movement. some of the things that I found really interesting is that she took this desert route going down. So went over Death Valley, leaving on the Mono Basin on September 4th, and came across the Colorado River. Would have guessed, my hypothesis was, of course, that she would have, when she got to the Colorado, would have followed it, but no, she just crossed it and went over the Sonoran Desert, and then eventually made this turn to the coast, and then did more what we were hypothesizing of following the coastline down here till completing her migration on September 13th. So that was over the course of 10 days and flew a distance of 1,300 miles. And unfortunately, a few weeks after she arrived in Mexico, her transmitter stopped functioning and we didn't get any additional data, but the migration data is wonderful. And Leroy, our adult male, we were able to get a lot of local movements from Leroy as he was foraging to provide for his mate and nestlings. So we deployed his transmitter in the middle of June and were able to collect data until August 19th, although that was partial. So really what I'm showing here is through August 1, which was the last complete data dump that we have from his transmitter. So a total of 44 days of complete movement data. And some of the stuff that we noticed is, so he was banded here, which is with the transmitter, which is actually only a quarter mile from Levine Creek, so really close, but it doesn't appear that he really spent much time foraging on Levine Creek, on the mouth within that 1 mile range, really was going higher up into Levine Creek, but never actually crossed the crest. This line here is the crest of the Sierra Nevada. So I have a few points where it got close, but really stayed east of the crest and spent made a couple forays over to June Lake and Grant Lake. But again, what we're surmising from, just to take a little bit of the rigid scientist out, what we're surmising is that he would start on Levine Creek, and if after a certain amount of time he wasn't successful, he would fly across over the June Lake Loop and try foraging in one of these lakes. So looking a little bit closer at that Levine Creek data, where the majority of his time was spent, is really, there's this one spot here that seemed to be where he foraged the most. This is, there's about 100 records in this cluster of points occurring right here. That accounted for about 31% of the detections we had from him away from the nest site. And said it looks like there's a couple points here that maybe was more of a roost site near the nest, because mostly these points were seen with movement, because the transmitter actually detects the direction, distance, and speed that the bird is moving when it collects a point. And so this was all mostly movement data, moving up and down lower Levine Creek and really using those upper waters, which to some extent makes sense. You can't really make it out in the aerial, but the lower part of the creek has a thicker canopy of willows and cottonwoods. And when you get up into the upper reaches, that's where that photo that I showed you has that more open meadow with the open water. That's going to make it easier for them to forage. And then we thought Leroy's story was done, that we couldn't figure out, we never found him, but we just thought something happened to the transmitter. We haven't deployed any more transmitters, because we also learned that Osprey have an unusually high mortality rate with the transmitters. So we started to get concerned about that, and have put a pause on that part of the research until more is done with larger populations to learn how best to track these birds. So just to remind you, in July of 2015, we captured him as an adult and gave him 2 metal bands and put that transmitter on him. And then just 2 months later, his data transfer ended. So we thought that's the end of his story. I kept checking for data for a couple months, and then when it didn't come in, kind of gave up on that. Figured again that the transmitter went, or he perished, and it wasn't somewhere where the transmitter does require a cell phone connection in order to transmit the data. So just figured a lot of places on the east side, there's no cell phone reception. He must have perished there. And then in May 2020, we received an email with his band number on it, which really was a head scratcher. That in August of 2016, he was actually reported dead. It took 4 years for the data to get to us because the bird banding lab didn't know if it was a quality report or not. The report noted the 2 bands and gave the right numbers, but it didn't mention anything about the transmitter, which was odd. And the reporting party, they gave their work email address and then left that job shortly after reporting the band, and nobody was able to put us in touch with them. So again, we couldn't get any additional information from them. The bird banding lab tried for years with no avail, but ultimately decided to accept the data report. But it's another reminder to please make sure to give good contact information, because we really do follow up with additional information. Bless you. If you have photos, we'll also contact you to see if we can use the photos. That's how I got some of the ones for this presentation. But so this is, again, just a little closer look where that all the way to Alabama and almost all the way to Georgia. So Leroy definitely is one of the most fascinating birds, and it's so frustrating. Of all the band recoveries that you would want a transmitter on, he had a transmitter, and we didn't get the data of how he ended up in Alabama. We will never know. But hoping we get more band data, return data, to maybe if that flight gets reoccurs, that we might get some band sightings and get some more data points along the way and try and figure that out. So back to, just to pull the study back together again, and the whole talk is that some of the preliminary conclusions that we've had with this study are that we definitely have a high nesting success rate at Mono Lake, and the population is increasing. We think, again, that the Tufa really provides some great nesting locations, that it compensates for the fishing being further away. And migration, clearly there's a migration pathway to Mexico, but there's also one that is showing to Texas. We've got that interesting point in Alabama. We've got this interesting point out at Oso Flaco Lake. So really not in the whole, sure, that bird is moving around a bit, so the full Morro Coast, and that the averaging foraging distance is looking at 4 to 5 miles as opposed to that more traditional 1 mile, and that they are going up to 13 miles away with some regularity based on the limited data that we have. So again, I think what that's pointing to is that the nest characteristics are actually more important to proximity to fishable waters, and starting to see more studies in the literature that are supporting these conclusions. But always with science, the more answers we get, the more questions we get. My enthusiasm does not wane. So hope that you have really learned something with this talk, enjoyed it, and please share it with others. Look for and report bands, whether it be the osprey out on the coast there, if you're seeing plovers, gulls, any other bird. Don't forget to get a little bit of a fetish for their ankles, see what bands are on there, and make sure to report it. And if you see photos of others that have bands too, or they mention it, to always ask that question, did you remember to report it? Reportband.gov. And then, of course, please come and visit at Mono Lake when it's safe to do so. This is photos from one of my field trips years ago for the Mono Basin Bird Chautauqua, which in theory happens every June. We're hoping for an in-person one next year. So with that, thank you very much. Just want to thank some of our funders and Bloom Research and the Friends of Mono Lake Reserve who accept our donations, because we are funded both by grants, California State Parks, and private donations. And we've had lots of people that have helped the study over the years. So thank you. And I will see how we want to handle any questions. You're welcome.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the questions off the chat, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We have a couple comments. They said the chirp sounds fairly similar to the bald eagle, was one of the comments.
Yeah, I can see how that can be. It is definitely in the evolutionary tree. Bald eagles and osprey they're about as close as they can get, but they're up near the early branching, and osprey actually are in their own genus. Starts getting into the technical nerdy stuff that I try not to pull in too much, but yes.
Oh, someone wants to know what the lifespan of the osprey is.
Ah, yes, they can live up into their 20s once they make it past those first few years.
I was surprised at the survival rate. It seems really high compared to some other birds for their first year. So that was good to hear.
Yeah,
what-
and I
Go
say
ahead.
we do, it's interesting, sites like this, the study's been going on so long. We know we have nests like the Navy Beach nest has been continuously occupied, as far as we know, since 1985. So clearly those aren't the same two birds. But so they have high nest site fidelity and high pair fidelity, but they will, if one is deceased, a new mate will come in. So we do still have that continuous nesting at a lot of our nest sites.
Nice. What would be the extent of the lake if it was high enough to cover the tufa?
It would basically be the basic, because it's much higher up. If you have the opportunity to go to Mono Lake, then you can see some tufa that are pretty high up. This is where I like giving the field trips, because I can show you some of the lines, and you actually can see where the vegetation changes a little bit and where kind of the bathtub rings are. If you go to the Mono Lake Committee website, they do have a graphic that I think it's like under Learn, that shows a little bit about where the different lake levels are. And then if you get the opportunity to visit, if you go to the county park on the North Shore and then near 395, and then walk through the park to the State Parks Boardwalk below County Park, there are signs there that show the elevation on the different years. And then similarly, if you go to South Tufa on the South Shore, there's the parking lot. It's right before you enter the parking lot. There's a sign for the pre-diversion water, so that the parking lot would be underwater. And then as you walk the path down, they have the signs that you can see the different lake levels.
Right. The predator I've personally witnessed at Mono Lake on the Tufa was a great horned owl.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you don't have much predation by those at this point with the.
No,
the
yeah, I mean, we know that if you've gone on one of the canoe tours, you often can see a great horned owl perched there at South Tufa, but no, we're really not seeing that. So I think the great horned owls are, they're foraging on something else. For whatever reason, it's not, the risk or the reward is not worth it for them, that we're not having that. And we have one of the largest Western California gull nesting colonies. For a while there, it was the largest. Just other ones got bigger that superseded it. Not that one got smaller. And we saw some interaction, but not a lot between that.
So which of the pairs are the same over the period of research? And are there any original pairs that you know of that are still breeding? And then the third part of the question was, where do new pairs come from and how do they establish themselves at Mono Lake?
Those are all excellent questions and all things we are still working on answering. That's where, when we started, and actually some of the pieces I left out was I wanted to start color banding immediately. Those are questions that I had. And I knew that by getting those color bands on, we would be able to identify individuals. The problem is that there's a limited number of color band options. And so in order to get issued by USGS, your unique identifier, you have to really have a study in a population that warrants it. And so there was concern in the beginning that our population's too small, that we'd be using up white on black with nothing with such a small group, that it really wouldn't it wouldn't measure up in the grand scheme of bird research. But ultimately, obviously, we were able to get that, and really some of it was just Pete Bloom not feeling confident yet. And after 5 years, he was like, okay, yeah, we need to start getting this. But we haven't. And so then we're not targeting the adults. It's only when we happen to have them in the hands. It's really just from those visits when we were trying to capture the adults for the telemetry that we ever had adults. And so it's taking ones like Black 18 coming back for us to start getting those adults to know the nesting pairs. Although we do expect okay, wait, I always get this backwards. I think it's females stay close. I think it's females stay close to home and males go far, but I could have that backwards. But so we wouldn't expect a pair that would have both the male and female banded at Mono Lake as nestlings. Most wildlife have that adaptation of either the male or the female has a tendency to disperse further in order to decrease the chances of inbreeding.
Gotcha. For those of us who are unfamiliar with the color banding, I just picked up from what you said that the black and white is used only for Mono Lake osprey. Is that what I'm understanding?
For the most part, yes. We said Pete has deployed a few of those bands down in Orange County on some osprey, but they're really for the osprey. I think there is the possibility, if the populations aren't supposed to cross, that you could have, like, in another part of the country, like on the East Coast, something like that. And in fact, that for one of our first photo report from Texas was a very confused person that I don't know why they didn't report it to the bird banding lab first, but they actually sent an email out that it was an entertaining chain of that went by the time it got to us of, hey, do you know whose this is? I don't know anybody doing this, but I don't know where this bird came from. And then it kind of ultimately made it to Pete going, well, this can't be one of yours because you're out in California, but do you know who's doing this? And it's like, actually, that's ours.
Okay. I think this was answered. Where did the bird get the fish? It sounds like it's the streams that are feeding into Mono Lake, and in particular, the one that you telemetried was Levine Creek.
Correct. And then, you know, but that's one, obviously that's one bird that we were tracking, but we do know that if you're in Levine Canyon, if you're birding Levine Canyon, you pretty frequently will now see an osprey fly over you. And some of their success rates up there is pretty impressive, or I'm seeing different individuals, but I've been standing there and seen an osprey go by, and it seems like not that much longer later, I see it come back with a fish. I'm sure, so very easily could be a different bird because I didn't get my eyes on the band, but yeah, definitely have seen that a fair number of times.
Who else is banding osprey in the West? Or where else are they?
I don't know of any active projects in California that are currently happening. There's, see, I think Mark Martel, I think or at least he had been, I think like up in Minnesota, you have Rob Beauregard on the East Coast, kind of the Northeast population. He's been doing a lot of work banding and telemetry on osprey. What I see, you know, most people, they talk about doom scrolling on social media. I osprey scroll. I just go through, I really have an Instagram account to look for osprey bands. And I just follow any hashtag that goes with that and scroll through. And then I have a Flickr account and I will periodically look for osprey bands on there. And the more consistent photos I see, there's certain birds I recognize, like there's a blue 28 that I think it's in Scotland, I believe, that in Europe, I see a couple there too. But it's good to see the birds over and over again.
Okay, there's another question. The question still stands. Why Mono Lake? What's so attractive, especially for new pairs settling there? Do they get caught on that the state is adding fish to the creek, so there's a continually replaced food source?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So yes, the question still stands. The question will always stand, why Mono Lake? No matter how many times I ask the osprey why, they don't answer me. They just make me follow them. But I said, you know, what we're thinking is that the tufa are just such a safe place to nest, that you don't have to work with the tree can topple, the tree sways. With the Tupa Tower, it's incredibly stable. It provides a platform that is actually somewhat similar to what a nesting platform is that humans have put up. It And although there's high wind, they tend to build lower profile. They can build lower profile nests on the tufa. And so the nests do survive more of those wind events, or I don't know if they're able to just rebuild them a little bit faster. And then it's for low predation rates that on the osprey. So something is working, and that's what we're really studying and trying to get more answers about. But absolutely, Mono Lake is attractive.
Excellent. Last question. Since you banded mostly young birds, do you suspect that those far eastern movements were dispersals?
It is definitely possible that some of them are dispersals, but based on the time of year, think that it also has migration. But absolutely, dispersal is possible, and that's where, you know, needing those repeat data points is critical to understand, because we just don't know what's going on. You have so much less coming in on a band return than you do on a transmitter.
Well, Lisa, that wraps it up for comments and questions. Thank you so much. This was a quite engaging presentation. I spent a lot of time personally in Mono Lake on the Eastern Sierra, so it's familiar territory to me, and I'm really pleased to hear that the osprey are moving into that area also. We're finding the same thing in Morro Bay, that the osprey are continuing to come, and we have as many as 8 to 10 birds at a time throughout the winter.
Excellent. Yeah, I know that I'm always looking when I'm there, and well, when I'm anywhere. So it's always exciting to see. Thank you so much for having me, and happy to answer questions later. Please come out and see us at Mono Lake when you can.
Great.
It's
well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to all who came. And remember, next November 15th is Birds of San Luis Obispo. We hope to see you there. And I'm getting a lot of thank yous in the chat room also for a very informative presentation. Thank you so much, Lisa. We appreciate your time tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to take a moment to look through the chat as well to see if I missed anything.
Okay.
Have a great evening, everyone.